Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story, Hilt of a Blacksmith. I don't enjoy killing people. I don't enjoy ripping out the soul from its flesh that just drops a lifeless corpse to the ground, cold as ice. I enjoy knife, though my knife doesn't kill. It stabs the death is their own fault. My knife lets a person bleed. It lets many people bleed red as ruby nectar drips, sometimes gushes. From their body they fall still alive, still breathing. I imagine licking their blood from the ground. As it's delicious, it must taste horrible, but it feeds my needs and desires and gives me life. It only lasts a short, while though the blood drains and death steals the soul from me. I like it when they contort their faces in pain. I enjoy their blood and watch them slowly die. I don't like it when the energy, the fight for life, simply leaves. This is why I hate death. I would stab him if I could, but I can't. I can't touch him. He doesn't hear me yell at him. I scream at the top of my lungs, but my words fade. He ignores me. I stab more and more to keep a sense of euphoria, whether it be men, women, children, elders. I don't care. I need my distraction. I would surely go crazy if I didn't. Death taunts me enough. I hate it when I get no rush. This one girl, striding down the street, she annoyed the shit out of me. There was a solid emotional expression on her face. I walked up to her, and sheated my blade. A very clean slice into her stomach. She coughed blood, stomach fluid, she fell. I laughed. I watched over her. She held that expression, there was no emotion on her face. I was enraged. I stabbed her. Again and again, she never cringed. Death stole her soul before I could embrace it. I cried, and cried, and laughed. And I wanted more still. I want more. I need that euphoria. I refused to let him taunt me. A few people later that night also tried to fight back at me. That was very fun. Bullets went through my host's head many times, through his chest, through his legs. I smiled, just once, enough to make them drop. They dropped and they dropped blood. Fear and pain froze on their faces, euphoria. Since that day, I've gone through a few hosts. It's been 200 years, my creator is long gone, but I still live on with his desires. The second story, happiness for sale. Amy came into town today. A very strange man, he looked to be in his 30s, walking with a hunched back with a load of items upon it. He had thinning red hair and antanasate skin, as well as an almost skeleton-like frame. He was quite small, really. It was the big grin on his face that got to me. It was such a large smile, almost inhumanly big. Its edges seemed to stretch beyond his cheekbones and into his eyes. He strolled into town with that joyful expression on his face, speaking in almost whispers to children who were lined along the road. The children would stare, emotional as he whispered to them. I couldn't make out what he was saying from the distance, so I sat on the centerpiece in the town square, waiting for him to cross my path. I was genuinely terrified, to be honest, but I didn't know why. Yet, even still, I wanted to wait for him. I couldn't explain this curiosity, but it had a hold on me that would not be released until I spoke to the eerie man. He slowly began approaching me. The soft thudding of his footsteps was barely audible over the dull roar in the square, yet all the same, I could hear it plainly as anything else when I waited in a slight panic for him to reach me. He stopped in front of me, still not facing me. I looked up. to catch his face, he stared forward, and then slowly turned towards me. He never opened his eyes, and the smile never disappeared from his face. Turning his head to me, he opened one eye and stared directly at me with it. I slumped down. An incredible fear that I had never felt hit me like a wave. He didn't say a word. He only stared into my eyes with the hook he had opened. I completely lost track of reality. The sounds of the town square around me faded away, and I became immersed in an eerie silence that seemed deafening. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. Nothing would move. My body seemed frozen to the bricks I was sitting on. The smile felt like it was looking at me, almost like there was the true man behind it, not the eyes. I can't explain it, but to put it the best I can, the smile seemed ageless. Eternal, it echoed in my mind into infinity. My body began leaning away from him. Slowly his head turned back to face the road, and he began to go on his way again. I was shaking violently. I felt like I could throw up. As he walked off, I realized that there were masks on his back. He must have been a mask collector of sorts. That night I couldn't sleep. All I could think about was the meeting with him in the square. He didn't say anything, but I felt as if he completely disemboweled me with his glance, his piercing eye. I didn't know what it was, but that man was not human, man. No, he was something else. Something very sinister. That ageless feeling wouldn't go away either, as if he was some sort of ancient demon, wandering the earth from city to city, town to town. Why though? I wanted to know more. I was becoming obsessed with the very thing that terrified more than anything else. Tomorrow I would search for him and see if he was in town. I had honestly hoped he had left. Yet if he hadn't, I could learn more about him. The next day I ate breakfast and ran to the square. I saw a small group of people gathered around a small vacant building in the corner. I ran over to see him, the demon, standing in front of everyone. He had his hands together and was speaking about how he was opening his happy mask shop here in the square. He preached and preached, come one, come all, to the crowd. They all seemed mesmerized by his words. Finally he finished and entered inside the tiny building. A small sign next to it read, HAPYMASK INESK HAPINES ISJ USTA ASKWAY. I shuddered. What was so scary about this man? I had to know more, so I ran inside. There was already a few people in there, yet it was silent. No one was talking. What was going on? Were they negotiating something? I saw a man, a child next to him, and a woman behind him, yet none of them were saying anything. They were only staring at the happy mask. Man, he nodded his head, as if they had reached some silent agreement, and handed the masks to the man and child. They turned and walked out. As they passed, I saw a glazed look in their eyes, as if they were completely out of it. The woman was out just behind them, carrying another mask. Then it was me. I was all alone with him. He cocked his head, maintaining his silence. He wanted me to speak, so I did, asking him about his shop as well as where he came from. Silence. He didn't say anything. He just kept grinning. I was beginning to become irritated, yet simultaneously more frightened too. I stepped back towards the door, asking him to answer me. Just then a child walked in. It was a boy not over 5 years old. He walked up to the happy mask man. The man stood there and hunched over to the boy. The boy held out his hands, expecting the mask perhaps. The happy mask man opened his eyes, both of them, and stared the most evil glare I had ever seen at the child. I stepped back again, almost tripping as I reached for the doorknob. To my sheer terror, the man grabbed the boy by the neck and picked him up off the ground. I could hear horrific screeches of terror coming from the boy's throat. He was at least 8 feet off of the ground. Just then the salesman's mouth began opening. Still smiling, of course. It grew wider and wider, until it was at least a foot wide. I could hear his jaws snapping as it opened. Horrible and inhuman sounds began coming from him as he raised the child higher. Then, all of a sudden, the child was halfway down the salesman's throat. I screamed as I could see the boy's legs kicking in the salesman's mouth. Slowly but surely they slid down and disappeared. The boy was gone. I began crying hysterically, yet I still couldn't move. He turned to me, his mouth still hanging wide open. He then put his hands to his face. A strange glow began to appear around his hands. Slowly he peeled his hands away from his face. A repulsive stretching sound could be heard as skin appeared to be getting pulled off. He arched his back farther, until his hands were separated from his face by a clump of flesh at least 2 feet long. This thing, was an absolute monster. The flesh tore off, leaving the same grinning face. He stood there with a mass of skin in his hands. Slowly the skin began molding and contorting. I backed into the corner. What the hell was going on? Before I knew it, the skin had turned into a small shape in his hands. He held his hand out, showing me his new prize. It was the child's face. He made a mask out of flesh. The horror hit me, and I began vomiting into my lap. I heard a small chuckle coming from the salesman. No, I have to get out of here. I got up and ran for the door. Upon grabbing the doorknob, I heard one more thing. Do you want a mask, my boy? Tears were streaming down my cheeks as I was sobbing and running across the town square. I could hear people gasping and shrieking as I ran by. I'm sure I was a poor sight. A child covered in blood and vomit. I didn't care though. The thing in there was a demon. I ran to my house and ran straight to my room. Both of my parents were out. I sat there for what must have been hours, rocking back and forth and covered in filth. Finally, I got up and looked out the window. The small building was still there, but no one was going into it. The sign was gone. To this day, I have no idea what happened or what I experienced. I've never told anyone because I know no one will believe me. I washed myself and tried to continue my life as normal after that day. The happy mask salesman was gone. I even asked around town, and people all claimed they either had no idea what I was talking about, or they weren't sure. Dead ends were everywhere. Had it been a dream? I know I would not make up something like that, and I pity all those who may experience him in the future. That monster, that thing, may the gods protect all who come into his path. It's been a few years now. A lot has happened since then, but he has never come back, and I dread the day more than anything when he may. If he does, I'll be sure to stay clear. If you see a man in your hometown claiming to sell masks, a man who looks often seems to be hiding something sinister, stay away from him. He isn't human, whatever he know it. It is the very essence of evil itself. The third story. Next, I really hated working for Joe. He was the standard, bitter old man with a tongue of hate and disgust for anyone not as old and miserable as him. I had no choice though. I was young and needed the money, so I had no choice but to be his wage slave. Day in and day out I would work on his farm, shoveling animal excretion and feeding his bizarre critters. I say bizarre because something seemed off about them. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but they seemed almost entranced. Not like the standard loud and obnoxious farm animals. But I didn't care as long as they were happy. Joe was happy, and if he was happy, I got paid. It was getting colder out, and I hated winter Joe. His farm was in the middle of nowhere, at least a 10-minute drive from my house. I lived in the downtown area, nothing at all close to the country lately. I've had to get up, in the morning and haul through the slick and icy country roads to get to the old man's place. My dad knew Joe. I guess as a child he had seen him in town a lot. He was kind of a staple to the community. When Dad told me I would be working for him, I was glad to get up, yet quite disappointed with whom I'd be working for. I stuck with it though, and have been working for him for 5 months now. He pays well, so you won't see me quitting anytime soon. Although lately things have been getting weird. For starters, I didn't have to always get up at 4 when I first started working for him, and the following 3 months after I could sleep till noon, then head over. Yet about a month and a half ago, he called my cell early one morning. He said he wanted me to come over and feed, as well as clean his animals. I asked why so early and why so sudden. He got very angry and said he'd fire me if I didn't come. So I agreed, of course, and headed over. His farm was pretty big. There's a lot of land and livestock. I got out of my car and headed to the barn, almost tripping over the frozen mud and its and Evans. The frigid air did some work to quell the animal stench, but it didn't do the full job. My nose turned as I walked in to see the things awaiting my assistance in place of Joe. They all faced me, the horses, the cattle, and the chickens. They all watched me silently. It was only then that I realized that I had never heard his animals make a ruckus. They were always silent. You guys are strange, I said. Walking up to the horses, the horse turned away, almost yelping. I jumped back and turned to see the cattle and chickens all moving to the other side of their pens. What the hell was going on? Feed him. And wash him good. I want to see this barn spotless before sunrise, Joe said, almost appearing out of nowhere from behind me. I jumped. All right, Sir Joe, eyed me for a second, then slowly looked off. He had the saddest eyes I had ever seen on any man. His face was lively with the scars and wrinkles of what looked like 10,000 days of work and misery. To be honest, he looked dead, hollow, a walking phantom. He turned and walked off, almost disappearing into the darkness of the early morning. I sighed. Time to get to work, I guess. The sun was just visible as I finished shoveling out the pig's pen behind the barn. The inner barn was finished. They were fed, cleaned, and inspected. The pigs were really freaking messy, but I finished them in time too. Well done. Go home, Joe said, again appearing out of nowhere. I was confused. No 12-hour shift today. You sure, sir? I said. He looked off into the distance. He seemed fixed on something. The rustling trees were the only audible things all of a sudden. The silence between us seemed eternal. Finally, he turned back and looked at me. Yeah. Go on. Well, that was that. I got back in my car and began driving away. I don't know what happened. Maybe I was really tired and seeing things, but I swear in the rearview mirror, I thought I saw Joe disappear into thin air. I laughed. Surely I'm seeing things, right? Like I said, that was a month and a half ago. Since then, there has been more strange stuff. The biggest one being the animals there disappearing. I noticed as I repeated my cleaning routines in the barn. First it was the chickens. One was missing from the pen. I couldn't help but count them. I had to interact with them so much. I noticed quickly more and more were missing, even notifying Joe. He didn't seem to care him. Well, I'll have to look into it. Probably a weasel, or something, he would murmur. I began to wonder if he was behind it. But why would he be? I shrugged it off. There was nothing I could do about it. Then Penny, one of his horses, disappeared. Now this made me uncomfortable. Chickens are one thing, but a whole horse. Again, Joe didn't seem to care. This was all last week. Still fresh in my mind what the hell was going on. What's happening, guys? Where are you all running to? I said to Gabby as I watched her. His eldest cows, he did what she and all the other animals do, stared at me blankly and silently, not that I expected her to answer anyway. Today is very frigid. I swear the wind chill is at least 10 degrees. I just want to go home, but Joe is making me stay later than usual. He's having me look after his animals while he goes out into something in the wheat field. I asked him if he needed any help, but he didn't respond. He just walked off. It's almost 9 o'clock. I'm getting antsy. The animals are either staring quietly at me or out at the field. I was getting more and more curious as to what Joe was doing out in the field. I got up and walked to the barn door. The outside air stung my face, pushing me back in the warm barn. Just then, I saw a bright light out in the center of the field. What? I said, leaping up to my feet again. The animals became hysterical, making noises I had never heard before. This greatly unnerved me. They were always so quiet. This wasn't right. What is wrong? Relax, I said, waving my arms, trying to get a futile message across to the screaming animals. Just then Joe appeared again, walking slowly out of the field. Oh hey, yes. I trailed off. There was someone behind him. As he got closer to the barn, I began to feel a strange fear I had never felt before. Almost a panic. The man, poor thing behind him, was at least 5 feet taller than he was. The TOWERED over him. I mean, he was dwarfed. And Joe was not a small man. I began backing away, turning to see the animals all doing the same in their pens. As they reached the light of the barn, I saw the thing's face. Its whole body was this tall, grey thing. It had enormous black eyes and equally large mouth. I couldn't see any teeth, but I got the sensation it could eat me. WH, I stuttered, trying desperately to figure out what was going on. The thing was sickly skinny. It looked like it was anorexic or something. It leaned over Joe's shoulder and looked at me square in the face. Suddenly I could speak, and knew exactly what I was going to say. You're what's been taking them, right? I couldn't breathe. I was getting more and more fearful. It stared at me for a moment. Without warning, it grabbed one of the chickens from out of the nearby pen. Wait, I said, leaping up. In a flash the chicken was gone, and falling down the thing's throat. Sorry, kid. This is how things are around here now, Joe said, staring down at the ground. Blood was everywhere, all over the ground and me. What is this? What? I said, snapping out of my trance to see the horror before me. The grey thing had taken a bite out of Joe, a big bite. Half of Joe's upper body was gone. The chewed flesh and muscle hung off the bite radius like the petals of a gory flower. His spinal column was sticking out of the red mass. The thing was eating everything here. I got up and tried to run, but I couldn't. My legs were frozen. The thing walked over to my side. I had begun shrieking. Now this couldn't be happening. It smiled a bloody smile and squinted its giant eyes at me. Why was this happening? What the hell was this thing? An alien? It grabbed my legs and lifted me off the ground, my head slamming into the dirt as I was raised. The animals were in mass hysterics by now, making group noises of terror I had never heard before, or even thought possible by them. It stared into my eyes for the longest time. It wasn't evil looking back at me. It was something I had no way of understanding completely. It smiled and gently put me down, walking over to the barn door. It grabbed Joe's remaining body and consumed it in one gulp. It seemed so unreal, like I was dreaming, and what it was doing was impossible. It turned to me. "He let you see me. That was an error. Your turn, child," it said without moving its mouth. Just then I knew exactly what was going on. It was handing the job over to me. Whatever it was having Joe do, ear feeding it, or using his things, it was saying now it was my turn to do the same, and not screw up. In his will, he gave the farm to you. I made sure of that before tonight, it said. I couldn't believe it. By tomorrow, the day after that, and the day after that, I would be the new keeper of this farm. I would be the next in line to inherit this disease, this punishment. I would be the next to interact directly with whatever the hell that thing was. It gave me one last evil smile and walked off into the field. Eventually the light went out in the center of the field too. To my astonishment, the blood and gore was gone from Joe's body. It had taken care of that. This was all going to go as planned. The animals maintained their usual silence, staring at me once more. I got up and stared out into the field. The job was mine. I was next in line. Who knows how long Joe had done this? Who knows how many generations of his family had dealt with this thing? Now the burden was on my shoulders. Now I was next.